Hello everyone, I am Anthropomantic Fiend and I do horror-related things on the internet. And for the first time in a really long time, I'm doing a tag video today. And this is of course Sean Erschen's John Carpenter tag. I was not tagged to do this video, but I love John Carpenter's movies, those that I have seen anyway, and I think Sean is just a rad human being, and a lot of my friends were doing the tag. It looked like a fun tag. I haven't done a tag video in forever, so I thought I'd do it. Please go subscribe to Sean if you haven't already. Awesome human being, really fun channel, really good taste in horror. I did a live stream on his channel as a special guest of the Horror Hangout a little while back, talking about Universal versus Hammer, which was the most fun I've had in a long time. I laughed really, really hard. I will link Sean's channel up in the cards and possibly that video specifically as well. And without further ado, here are my answers to the John Carpenter tag. So question 1 is, what is your favorite music score from Carpenter? I think that either applies to scores Carpenter wrote or scores from one of Carpenter's movies. Mine is still both, and I went with, to nobody's surprise, In the Mouth of Madness. This is just my favorite John Carpenter movie anyway. I absolutely love the meta-ness, the commentary on the power of stories, but more than anything, just the way it balances like dark, surreal, disturbing, cosmic horror, body horror, weirdness with this sense of humor where Sam Neill's character is like the butt of every single joke. It's a very kind of dark and mean-spirited towards this guy sense of humor, but it's just really, really fun. And the score for this has that signature John Carpenter synthiness, but also, particularly when you're looking at the main theme of the movie that comes in at the very beginning and the very end, just this absolutely rockin' electric guitar thing that is very, very reminiscent of Enter Sandman by Metallica. But every time that theme comes in full force with the electric guitar, my brain just immediately starts making happy chemicals. I'm just super pumped, and maybe that's because I myself am an electric guitarist, and I started learning guitar and really fell in love with it because of just these big, chunky power chords and bar chords and things. You've got the more atmospheric, sinister, synthy side of everything, and then just the fun rock element of the score, and the combination of those two things really accents the way the movie is dark and mind-melting, but also playful in the way it's meta and kind of poking John Trent, Sam Neill's character, and just kind of having fun with the expectations of the audience. There's obviously like a dark existential apocalypticness running through this whole movie, but with this edge of just playful, chaotic glee that I think is really reflected in the score and just makes me super happy. Question 2 is most underrated John Carpenter movie. For me, that's still technically In the Mouth of Madness, and I'm going to use this moment to briefly also say that the way they use kind of this Muzak version of the Carpenters in the opening insane asylum scene is another amazing and hilarious use of music. But since I've already talked about In the Mouth of Madness and will keep talking about In the Mouth of Madness until I die, I also wanted to give a brief shout out to Please Don't Kill Me, Ghosts of Mars. Because is it a bad movie? Yeah. From a technical and storytelling standpoint, might it be the worst John Carpenter movie I've seen? Yes, I think. But I don't hate it. Like, even if it doesn't work in the way any of the other Carpenter movies I've seen do, I just can't look away because of how weird it is and just all these out there choices that were made. You've got this matriarchal society kind of headed by Pam Grier, who also is subtly implied to be a lesbian. They're going to this planet where people are being possessed by just these murderous ghosts of Mars, but they're basically like alien demon things, which is just a fascinating concept in and of itself. The production design is not the best, but it just has a vibe that I find appealing in this weird way. Then there's also just like these weird prison break scenes and just weird little moments where I watch the movie's commentary with John Carpenter and I think the lead actress, and Carpenter was just like, oh, these scenes, you know how I just talk about how much I love Westerns all the time and have always wanted to make one. Well, I just decided to do those scenes, but in space. Whether or not it works, I just find that delightful, and also am in love with the fact that he hired Anthrax to play his score for the movie. And not only did he hire Anthrax, but also Steve Vai, I think Steve Vai, but I believe Steve Vai and Buckethead are also on the soundtrack. And it just also rocks really hard, not in such a great, controlled, fits so well with the movie way, the way In the Mouth of Madness does, but it's still pretty good. I would probably listen to the soundtrack on its own before I watched Ghosts of Mars again, but I would watch Ghosts of Mars again, and I don't think it's underrated in terms of quality as just like good filmmaking and storytelling, but I think it's underrated in terms of how fun it is as a movie. Question 3 is scariest scene in a Carpenter movie, and my answer is similar to Sean's in that it is just the entire Laurie Strode Michael chase scene from the end of the original Halloween. This is the awesome Anchor Bay release of Halloween that I ended up getting in late summer of 2019 at a bookstore while I was picking up books for school. This was like towards the very beginning of me even starting my YouTube channel. And that scene, or that sequence, if you will, just immediately puts stress on high because it very much is just a teenager in her neighborhood being pursued by this completely devoid of emotion, soulless murder machine. It's just like, oh my God, this strange man is following me, is chasing me, and I need to get back into the house. And the way there's this like sense of familiarity with like, yeah, that's a neighborhood. That's a house. I don't live in a house exactly like that one, but this feels familiar and is being disrupted by this killer, which is kind of what makes Halloween as a whole scary anyway. But that home invasion element of Halloween combined with just the constant stress and thinking on her feet that Laurie has to do, just really intense and really well done. And that might also be because in really stressful think fast situations, I tend to either freeze up or do something really rash. So I feel like I would not survive in that situation. So the pressure is on as soon as I see that. And it's just like, and good. And for most suspenseful scene in a Carpenter movie, I'm just gonna have to agree with Sean on this one. It is the blood test from the original Thing. This is the 2-disc set that also includes the prequel movie, which kind of underwhelming CGI aside, I don't hate. It's just simple but perfectly set up because you know one of them is going to be the Thing, and they are just slowly but surely going through each person's blood and you don't know when it's gonna pop up. And even when you do, kind of like Sean says, they just do this misdirection so well where you feel like it's going to be the last person they do and they're gradually building up to it. And I think it's like the penultimate one, like the next to last one that they end up doing, but they're already kind of arguing about something else, and then blood jump scare happens and you're already just really tense for a lot of different reasons, and then it just misdirects you for a moment so you let your guard down because you're wrapped up in this argument they're having, and then blam. Really well set up jump scare, but also just great suspenseful scene overall. Question 5 is favorite non-horror Carpenter movie. I'm also going to agree with Sean on this one and say Escape from New York. That is mostly because I have not seen Carpenter's entire filmography, and I think Escape from New York is the only one of his non-horror movies I've seen. And I haven't actually seen it in years, but like I remember it being just a really good, gritty, dystopian story that's probably drawing on a lot of the same Western tropes that Carpenter loves so much, but in a much more effective way than Ghost of Mars does them, and with this great setting of a just familiar city made into something even grittier and more derelict. It's just this great combination of grittiness and action and a light science fiction element where it's just theorizing about, what would happen if the future looked like this. And then just Snake Plissken as this kind of hero slash anti-hero who's just doing what he needs to do, but also fucking with the system the whole time is pretty awesome. I need to watch the movie again, because again, it has been actual years, but I remember it being pretty good, so that's my answer. Question number 6 is, will Michael Myers eventually die? And come on, you can't kill the boogeyman. You just cannot. That's the whole point with Michael Myers, is he's the representation of undying evil. So killing him off once and for all just doesn't work. Even if he does ultimately die in Halloween Ends, one, he's already found this entire new life and new set of fans through video games Dead by Daylight, but I also think that they might continue to include him in movies, but just as a character and a concept, the entire point of Michael Myers is that he is purely and simply evil, and evil as a concept, and him being the personification of that, can't die. So you can't kill the boogeyman. You cannot kill Michael Myers. It just is a impossibility. There's just no way. None at all. The Carpenter movie with the best spooky atmosphere, which is question 7, for me, that is going to be Prince of Darkness. And just in terms of aesthetics, The Fog is a gorgeous movie, and I love the score for The Fog. But with this one, there's something even more legitimately eerie about everything, because yes, we're just opening on this normal university, but even then there's just something strange lurking under the surface that the score really helps highlight. And then once we actually get into all the liquid Satan madness that's going on in this movie, it's done in this way where yes, there's strange body horror and dimension bending weirdness, but there's also just this subtly eerie apocalyptic way everything is happening. And yes, it is kind of being weird homeless people on the street, scary, but also it's just this purely and simply evil force sort of controlling whatever it can get its mitts on. So just anyone and everyone surrounding this building is sort of in the grasps of this force that you don't understand. And it's also just very shadowy and spooky looking, but there's just this sense of underlying menace and this kind of cosmic, incomprehensible evil that is always after you, that's just kind of manifesting through these simple, ordinary, everyday things, just these people on the street, one of whom happens to be Alice Cooper, and now they're trying to kill you. So that's fun. This is a cool movie. I like it. Number 8 is worst Carpenter movie, and technically, yeah, that's Ghost of Mars, but I just want to take this moment to say that I'm not the hugest fan of Christine, and I get why people like it. Killer car, cool, fun. I still prefer the car. I think the score for this one is pretty rad. I'm just not that on board with the actual characters. Yeah, you've got the bullied kid who becomes this cool kid with the aid of his car, and just that weird supernatural element, and that actual story arc is pretty interesting, but the actual pacing of the movie and the final Christine conflict, it just doesn't do a lot for me. And these actual kids are just the kind of shitty, obnoxious dude bro kids I tried not to hang out with at school. Yes, the bullies are that to the nth degree, but just these kids and the way they talk and just the casual misogyny is just I don't want to follow these people as main characters. I don't really like them. Why do other people like them? So yeah, I don't hate Christine, but in terms of enjoyability, I might like it less than Ghosts of Mars. So not the objectively worst Carpenter movie, but subjectively my least favorite. Question 9 is, if Carpenter were to come back and direct a sequel to one of his great movies, what should it be? I want Prince of Darkness too, because yeah, you could do great sequels to a lot of other things, and yes, this ends on its own kind of cool, sinister, ambiguous note, but if you were to come back now and do a sequel to Prince of Darkness, I would want it to be something where they kind of take the weird, ambiguous ending and run with it and are oh, the liquid Satan's back, it's out, and now we're just in the middle of the apocalypse that's implied as being a potential thing in this movie. And yeah, I totally respect the Apocalypse trilogy. The Apocalypse trilogy is probably my 3 favorite John Carpenter movies anyway, although Halloween is up there too. But as much as this is the 3rd entry is like my favorite Carpenter movie, and this is just a rad movie, I want to see the full potential of like a bunch of people, or like a small group of people, navigating this apocalyptic world where the forces of darkness have already taken control, and it's almost like continuing from the end of Invasion of the Body Snatchers, where like everybody's already been pod peopled, evil has already infected the world. Where do we go from here? How do we navigate this absolute hellscape and try to survive? I think that would play into the kind of existential apocalyptic dread and ambiguity that's already in all of the Apocalypse trilogy, but doing it with the weirdness that's in Prince of Darkness would just make for a really, really cool experience, in my opinion. Question 10 is, does John Carpenter have one last great film in him? Yeah, Prince of Darkness 2, like I just said. I don't know, actually, because he doesn't seem to want to come back to making films, and he's having a lot of fun doing his music thing. I don't think if he came back for one last film, his heart would be all the way in it, and it would be another masterpiece, unless he just suddenly found this amazing passion and motivation, and even then it might not be great. But if he found that passion again and was really motivated to make another movie, whether or not it was good, I would love to see him try, because if his heart is in it, even if it becomes another Ghosts of Mars, I want to see it and see what his process was and where he was coming from, because I think that will be really cool. So those are my answers to all 10 questions in Sean's John Carpenter tag. Thanks again to Sean for creating this tag. I probably have already linked his channel up here in the cards. I'm gonna tag a few people. I don't know who's on board with doing tags right now, who is even watching my content and is gonna see this, or who has time. I barely have time to make videos these days, but I am going to tag Red Rusty 66, Horror and Metal Maestro Red Rusty 66, I believe it is, Girly Gore, Dice Rollin', Those Horror Pals, and Gory B Movie. That's is my entry to Sean Ershen's John Carpenter tag. Thank you for watching my video, and hopefully I will see you in another one. Bye!